some of the stuff that you covered with Kate last half semester. So some of the offences that we're looking at, obviously because if you're looking at defences, you've got to have an offence to consider as well. And also, it's a good reminder to you in terms of you're going to have to start becoming familiar with this material. In the next 5 weeks, as we go into these workshops and as we prepare for the final exam, I'm going to be giving you longer fact patterns. This is sort of a variation of an old exam problem. So you are going to find that there are much more complex fact patterns coming at you, and it should be starting to give you some idea as to how much you are going to need to be thinking about when you go into your final exam. My suggestion to you in terms of preparing for your final exam, even though it's open book, is to prepare for it as if it's closed book. Your notes should be a reminder to you rather than a source that you rely on. Okay? So when I'm talking about the elements of offences and saying, you know, what are the elements of assault, those things should be starting to come automatically for you as quite simple concepts of particularly interpersonal violence that you should have your heads around. Okay, so a lot of these workshops are not just about actually grappling with how the law applies to the facts, it's also about starting to prepare you for exams. So this is really a long-term revision for you as well. Okay, I have, for those of you who prefer to have things on paper, I have actually printed the fact pattern with the legislation on the back for anyone who wants it. Please circulate. Just turn that round. Having fought the battle before around trying to get paper exams for you in addition to the exam online, but I know that for some of you, actually having a copy of the question in front of you that you can physically highlight, having a copy of the legislation in front of you that you can physically highlight is of use. I realise that obviously printing out the entire Crimes Act is one, not practical, two, extremely expensive. Buying the Crimes Act is extremely expensive. As I said in my announcement, you will have all of the provisions. We cannot get printed exams for you. I went into bat on this last year. I fought really hard. They just will not do it. Okay, so you are very, very welcome to retain the piece of paper that's just been handed round, which has the relevant legislation for this particular set of facts rather. So feel free to hold on to that if you prefer to have legislation on paper going into the exam. You can take it in with you. One of the things that I have created for you, which I've dropped into the module this morning, is just a tree diagram which gives you an outline of the basic elements for the defences. So that is essentially your defences topic on one page. So that's just your basic elements. Obviously, self-defence and compulsion are codified. Duress of circumstances, not at all, and as much as we can decipher, those are the elements from Hutchinson, but obviously the way in which they are actually applied is not quite so clear because we've got so few cases. But as much as we can, those are the elements that we can pull out from that case. So for those of you that find this useful, feel free to populate a slide like this with cases, the way in which the law works, etc., etc. But that just gives you an idea of what the main elements are for you to be thinking about. What defence am I actually applying here to a set of facts? So that is sitting under the module. I've just dropped it into the bottom of today's fact pattern, but it is in the module there if you want to have a look at it. Today's fact pattern involves a scenario of two girls who want to get into professional boxing. They've been asked to fight by a guy who's a bit dodgy. He's got a bit of a bad reputation, and it's described as being an underground fight. And it draws a large crowd, and neither one of them are that thrilled about it. And the view of the public is that it's little more than a brawl. It's not clear whether or not we have a ref. One of them has a few shots of vodka before getting into the ring, and one of them is told by the guy who's organised it that she must do a special move. So this is Beth, and the special move involves trying to gouge Tanya's eye out. Okay, so putting her thumb into the corner of the eye and trying to gouge the eye out. She's not really keen to do that, but he tells her do the move or else, and he makes a gesture to her, shows her a knife and makes a gesture to her as if he's going, the suggestion slitting of the throat, okay, with the gesture. So she thinks, the description is she thinks she's dead meat. She doesn't want to do it, but she gets back into the ring and she tries to perform the move. It doesn't really work. She ends up scratching the eyelid of the other person, causing it to bleed. At that point, she's supposed to go in for another punch, which she doesn't do. She feels terribly sick about what she's done, and she backs away from her. Tanya, whose eye is now bleeding, thinks that Beth is still coming at her, and she then puts her in a chokehold, restricting her breath until she collapses. When she then regains consciousness, she has ongoing problems afterwards. Tanya's freaking out that she's going to be harmed by Mark. She hasn't managed to perform the move, and so she tries to get out of the building that they're in, finds that there's been some flooding in the car park, panics, thinks she has to get away, gets in her car, takes off, and crashes into another vehicle. So you're going to have to consider whether or not Beth can be found guilty of assault with intent to injure under section 193 and injuring with intent. So when looking at those two sections, there's obviously a difference. What's the difference between section 193 and 189? Can someone tell me? I know that Kate absolutely hammered this point. When you start with 193, what do you start with? Assault, okay, it's built on assault. 189 is 189 built on assault? No, okay, so you start with what? When you're looking at whether or not 189 applies, what do you think about? What's your actus reus? Let's say, example, you're asked, consider whether or not this person could be guilty of section 188 or 189. What is the first thing you're going to consider? Yes? Yep, and there's a further thing that comes to that. So whether they injured the other person, so thinking about 188, 189, you're thinking, well, which one do I look at first? What are you thinking about? If it's not built on assault, where is your starting point for these sections? Maybe Kate didn't phrase it in this way. The thing you want to think about is, what is the level of harm? Yeah, you just want to think, well, but just from a basic point of view, what is the level of harm? Am I looking at grievous bodily harm, or am I looking at actual bodily harm? If I think I'm looking at really serious harm, do I meet the definition of the actus reus for section 188, which is your grievous bodily harm, wounding, maiming, disfiguring, etc. If I don't think I meet that definition, then I'm going to look at section 189 first, which is injure, which is actual bodily harm. Okay, so if it's not built on assault, if you're looking at sections not built on assault, then what you're thinking about is, what is the level of harm I can establish? And then you think about, okay, well, what is the mens rea that I can then establish in terms of that level of harm? Okay? And then when looking at Tanya, so Tanya's charged with strangulation and then charged with driving in a dangerous manner. Now, when I don't want to get too tangled up in the driving charge, obviously it's not an offence that we've looked at under the Land Transport Act, but it's fairly obvious. Really the main point there is whether or not you can look at a defence. So what I want you to do now is, as you go through your fact pattern, I want you to think about Beth, think, okay, what is in the fact pattern? Can I prove an assault? And then can I prove the necessary mens rea for that? Do I have a defence to that? And then looking at your injuring with intent. Same thing again with Tanya. Go through your elements of your offence, actus reus, mens rea, and then think about, have I got any defences? Okay. Likewise for your dangerous driving. I'll give you, let's give you until 25:2 on that clock to see how you go. Even if you can't get to the end, at the very least, I'd like you to cover strangulation with Tanya and think about whether or not there's a defence to that. Okay, so if you don't get to the driving, then at least try and get to the strangulation. Okay, and then we'll discuss it as a class at 25:2. Feel free to ask questions as you go. I'm happy to move around and answer any questions. Okay, any questions before we start? Has everyone who wanted a copy of the legislation and facts on paper got one? Okay, great. assuming that you're all awake. Sorry, the feedback in this room is terrible. Okay. Let's see how you got on. Sorry, I'm recording this particular session, so the mics aren't always reliable, so I'll stay near the microphone if I can. All right. So when we're looking at Beth, what's Beth done? And in terms of charging with Section 193, well, I would start with Section 193 first for her. So when you start with Section 193, as we've identified, you start with an assault. So where on the facts have we got an assault? Yes. Yep, we've got a definite application of force there, intentional application of force. That's obviously going to be the most obvious one, but it's also more likely to be relevant to the more serious charge of Section 189. So that's not to say that you can't use it for Section 193, but there's something else in these facts which actually you can use for Section 193, which in the exam got missed by a lot of students. Yes?
You could say in the second paragraph where Beth said that she makes contact with Tiny's body several times.
Yeah, well done. Okay, so we've got the contact with, makes contact with Tanya's body several times but without causing her any injury. Do you need injury for assault? No, okay, so you've got an intentional application of force. So you've got an assault. All right, not such an obvious one, but it is nevertheless an assault. What's your mens rea for this offence? An intention to, sorry? An intention to injure. Injure means actual bodily harm. Can we show an intention to injure? I get into a boxing ring with someone. Why am I there? To box? What is the intention of boxing? What am I trying to do? Punch them? And in trying to punch them, what am I trying to do? Injure. Okay. All right. I suspect what's confusing you is that she doesn't really want to be there, and you're sort of thinking, well, is that really what she's trying? What is her purpose? What is her desire? But you can still intend to do something even though it's not something you want to do. Okay, so we've got an offence of Section 193, but do we have a defence for that? What? Yes. Okay, consent. You're both in the ring. You're both consenting to some level of harm. Does it apply here? Oh my goodness, she's making us stretch our minds back to the earlier part of the last half semester. Yes?
I would say that both knew about Mark's organised boxing games involves more than just normal boxing, so they're aware of the consequence, so they consent to that.
Okay, so they might have consented to sort of the additional aspects of it, potentially. What else? Two gangs decide to go to war and they decide to have a fight on the street. Do the police go, okay, well, you both consented to that, that's okay, we're going to let that happen, we've got no problem with that, because you're all consenting to harm each other? Yep.
Queen and Barker, they said street fighting was an exception and they don't allow offensive consent for that.
Well done. Okay, so if it's street fighting, it falls into the exception to consent. Is this street fighting, and what facts are you going to look at to decide that? Yep.
It's not really regulated, it's underground, bare knuckle boxing. Guy in charge of it's a bit of a dodgy guy. It's quite unofficial.
Yeah, okay, so it reeks of not being a professional fight. It's more tantamount to street fighting, and therefore defence of consent wouldn't apply. It's one of the exceptions. Okay, looking then at injuring with intent. As I said, we start with the level of harm. Okay, so this is where obviously where you're going to look at your eye gouging. What is the level of harm caused here? What do you have to, what is your actus reus for section 189? Sorry? Injury. Okay, injury, actual bodily harm. What does that mean? Can someone give me, yes?
More than trivial, but not very serious.
Yeah, okay, so have we got that? Yep. So we can definitely establish our actus reus of actual bodily harm. We've got an injury. What about our intention? Now, of section 189, like section 188, you've got two different layers of mens rea. Section 189 has the more serious mens rea than section 189.2. So 189.1, we have to show an intention to do what?
Cause grievous bodily harm.
Okay, can we prove that? What is her intention here? Yep.
Like wound or maim, so like gouging the eye. I would say that does amount to her intending to cause it.
Okay. What about, sorry, you had,
Yeah, just that like gouging out someone's eye is pretty grievous. And of course that didn't end up happening, but the intention was to gouge the eye out, which is grievous bodily harm. So.
yeah, it's not about whether she caused grievous bodily harm, it's about whether or not she intended to cause it. What about the fact she doesn't really want to do it? Does that change intention? No? Yep.
So it's the intention to do the act, not the motivation behind.
Yeah. Okay, she's still intending to do the act, even though the motivation behind it is different. For anyone who's struggling with that, I was trying to think about a practical an example for you. One came up last night. My son he wants to get more protein into his diet. He's trying to bulk. He'll be like, oh my God, Mum, I can't believe you told them that. So we said, well, if you want more protein, then I suggest you put raw eggs into your protein shake. I don't like raw eggs. Well, tough, right? So if he puts a raw egg in and he drinks it, he doesn't want to, but he's still intending to drink the drink, right? It's still his purposeful desire to drink it. He just doesn't want to because he doesn't like eggs. Okay, so I think that shows quite clearly the distinction between you can still do something that is your purposeful desire to do it, even though you don't particularly want to. Okay, if that makes it clear for anyone, I hope, otherwise I've just outed my son and he'll be very embarrassed for no good reason. Okay, so yes, I think we can establish section 189.1 that we've got an intention to cause GBH. Do we have any defences? Yes. Compulsion. Okay, so looking at our elements for compulsion and remembering that compulsion is very strictly applied. So, do we have a threat to kill or cause GBH accompanied by a demand? Yes?
The gesture of slitting.
Okay, so do gestures enough? Yep, so gesture is okay. Is there a demand? Because remember, compulsion inherently requires a demand.
Yeah, he said he will do the move well.
Okay, so we've got a threat to either kill or GBH accompanied by a demand. So we meet that first element. Second element is immediacy. Do we think that immediacy is satisfied? Now remember in Akalue, they said there might be some flexibility in this, but not much. And in the case of Neho, they said, as in Obita, that perhaps going out to the car park would be sufficient. But bearing in mind it's Obita, do we think that it would meet the objective standard of immediacy? It's a bit grayer, isn't it? I mean, he's not likely to step into the boxing ring and do it then and there, but I guess there's the possibility he might pull her back into the office and do it there, which is where he's made the threat. Would that suffice on the case of Neho? Probably. In Obita, would Akalue say that that's enough? Not clear. Okay, but you've got an additional problem of element 3. What's your problem with element 3? Presence. Where's Mark? He's left. Okay. So is there anything else on the facts that we might be able to point to say perhaps presence could be satisfied? Yes?
I'm just wondering whether this presence can be considered when Beth may not know he left because she was doing the boxing, not noticing.
That's a very good point. Okay, but so she doesn't know he's left, but remember it's an objective element. So is the person in a position to immediately carry out the threat from an objective point of view? No. Okay, so but her knowledge goes to the final element. There might be the you could raise, sorry, yep.
Could it be the fact that some of us associate the elements in the other case?
Yep, it also is Niho. So you're well done. Yeah, there might be, he's unlikely to be there on his own, so you could raise the fact that if he's got associates there, that they might be able to carry out the threat. So in relation to the final one, does she think the threat's going to be carried out subjectively? So looking at your facts, she talks about, she knows he's got this bad reputation, he's made people disappear before, etc., etc. I think subjectively there's enough there to say, yes, she did believe the threat would be carried out. Okay, but you've got the problems of element 2 and 3 there, bearing in mind, of course, that this is very strictly applied. There's another problem here, though. What is it?
Is that compulsion is excluded for this type of event?
This type or...
Not that this like wounding, injuring with intent to cause grievous bodily harm.
So section 1891 is excluded, but 1892 is not. Okay? So section 24.2 provides that section 1891 is excluded, so you can't rely on compulsion. So for the Crown, you're actually you're going to be in a better position if you can establish section 1891. As defence, obviously it's better for you to be able to establish section 1892 because then you can rely on compulsion. Okay, so always check your 24.2. Yep.
Would you talk about exceptions after you go through the steps or before? Or would you talk about the exceptions before or after you go through the steps?
I think I would raise the exception before you got onto compulsion, and then I would say, but if she was found, if you couldn't establish that she was guilty of intention to cause GBH and simply was reckless, then compulsion would be available to her and then run through the steps of compulsion. Yeah. Also depending on time, right? Whoops. Okay, so then having a look at our strangulation. Oh, what is the other? No, actually, let's look at strangulation now because we haven't got much time. So strangulation, what are your steps for strangulation? So what do you have to show for strangulation? What are your actus reus requirements? Which then blocks circulation. Okay, so you either block the breathing through the nose or mouth, or you impede the blood circulation with pressure on the neck or the throat. Okay, what else? So you've got to do that, but you've actually got to apply. So that's, sorry, I didn't say that very well. You've got to do that, it's sort of got two parts to it. You've got to actually apply pressure to do that, and you've also got to have the effect of doing that. Okay, so make sure you realise that actus reus has two components to it. You can apply pressure to someone's neck, but without actually impeding the circulation. All right, so make sure you appreciate that you've got to have, if you've got pressure on the throat or around the neck, so in this case you've got a chokehold, it's also, you've got to establish that additional actus reus requirement that it actually impedes the breathing or the blood circulation. What's our mens rea? Yep. So you've either, that's your purpose or desire, or you had a conscious appreciation of the risk of impeding the breath or the blood circulation. You're prepared to run that risk anyway. Do we think we satisfy those requirements? Is there a defence? Self-defence? Okay. Do we think we've got enough here for self-defence? So what were the circumstances as she believed them to be? She's just tried to gouge out the other girl's eye. She's, sorry, make sure I've got my facts right. She's just had someone try to gouge her eye out. She's bleeding. She's trying to get to safety. She thinks that the fight is continuing on. She's in shock. So do you think what are the circumstances if she believes them to be? Yes?
She's about to be attacked.
Yeah. Okay, so she's, from a subjective point of view, even though she's mistaken, does it matter that she's mistaken? Do we have to consider the reasonableness? No. Okay, so it's a purely subjective view, provided we believe her. Is she acting in defence of herself? Okay, so then you've got to consider, was her force reasonable in the circumstances that she believes them to be? She thinks the fight's continuing on, this person's tried to gouge her eye out, she knows she's in this bare knuckle fight, it's all a bit, it's pretty dodgy. Do we know if there's a ref? Do we think that that is proportionate? Yep. I'm getting some nods from over here, but not much from over here. Do we think it's proportionate? Why are you looking at me? Look somewhere else. I mean, what do you think? These are the judgment calls you're going to have to make when you're in your exam. Someone's just trying to gouge your eye out. You're in a boxing fight. That's not a true boxing fight. And in an attempt to defend yourself, you put someone in a chokehold until they pass out. Is that a reasonable and proportionate response to what's happened to you? Yep.
Well, I'd say since we could classify that gouging out night was groups below the arm, I think it'd be proportionate.
Okay. Yep. Anyone got any other views? Bearing in mind, of course, that at this point, Tanya is not going, well, that reached the level of GBH. right? So she's just looking at it from the point of view of the situation that she thinks she's in. Yep.
I mean, it diffuses the threat of someone coming at her, which is what she believes it to be. It seems like pretty reasonable rather than like, pulling out a weapon.
Yep.
In a fight.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, so that's the sort of thing you want to talk about, right? What about the ability to get herself out of the situation? Yep.
She can't see and she's in a ring, it'd be pretty unlikely she'd be able to escape if she was getting charged.
Okay, what else? Absolutely, all of that is relevant. Anything else that might come into that discussion? Bearing in mind that you've got your case of Wang that says that even if you don't think there's any assistance coming, you still should be trying to take steps. Yep.
Wasn't she in a large crowd, so she could like help, you know?
Okay, so yeah, that's the sort of stuff you want to think about. So can she go, help, somebody help me, she's coming at me? Is that going to be the sort of thing we're going to expect from her?
I think given the fact that it's like a boxing match or a fight, it's not typical for someone in those circumstances to be asking for help or saying like, oh, like, stop, because, you know, you're, from an outside perspective, you've consented to be in that fight and you're supposed to fight until one person concedes, yes.
Until one person,
Concedes or, you know, the fight's over.
yeah, or the ref goes,
Yeah.
you know, okay, you know, retire to your corners. Do we have a ref? We don't know. Okay. Sorry, I just looked at the clock. In the final one, you should have been looking at, so the car driving thing, you should have been looking at duress of circumstances. And one of the problems you had there was that the threat really was coming from a person. Okay. Hopefully what this highlights to you is your grasp of pulling out these elements from your sections, relevant sections, needs to start happening a bit quicker. Right. See you next week on Tuesday when we start covering property.